It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly. Now this is from Theodore Roosevelt's speech in 1910, Man in the Arena. And it's a touchstone that Brene uses in her book and in her work of her Rising Strong, of the other one that she's done, Daring Greatly, and many of the other books and things. And what does she mean by this idea of rising strong? That's the name of the book. That's the process that she uses. Well, our series this month, all month, is called Rise of the Phoenix. And I think that's another way of looking at rising strong. It's rising from failure, mistake, foibles. I love that word, foibles. All those little things that happen. It's like, how do we rise up from those, be they little or large in our lives? Do you recall the story of the mythical bird, the phoenix? It was a very large bird by legend, by the myth. It's a Greek myth. And it regenerates itself about every 500 years. And it's said that it gets its new life by rising from the ashes of its predecessor. When it feels the end of its life approaching, it builds a nest with the finest aromatic woods, frankincense and myrrh. And it sets it on fire, and it's then consumed up by the flames. And from the pile of ashes, a new phoenix rises, young and powerful. It then embalms the ashes that remain, the ashes of its predecessor, into an egg of myrrh and flies to the city of the sun, where it deposits the egg on the altar of the sun god. That's the legend. That's the myth. And it's another story of the end only the beginning being the beginning. The end is only the beginning. So Brene says that rising strong is a theory that explains the basic social process that men and women experience as they are working to rise after falling. She's a research scientist, right? So she talks like that. But it's like the quote from Theodore Roosevelt about getting up. And this is the theory and the process that she's extrapolated from all of her research of talking with people and hearing their stories and doing her own inner work. And she's come up with this process. Now, if you're familiar with her work, you know that she blasted onto the screen, literally, in the TED Talk several years ago when she was talking about shame and vulnerability. And in this book, if you're reading along with us, in the first, I think it's first chapter, she's got 10 rules of engagement for this rising strong process. Now, I'm not going to read all 10 of them to you this morning, but I did pull a couple of them out that I think are really key in alignment with our spirituality and the things that we teach here in the Science of Mind. Number 3 is one of those, and she says, the journey belongs to no one but you, and no one successfully goes alone. But oh, don't we try? Don't we try to go it alone? Sure we do. It can be difficult to ask for help, right? It can be. It's not as difficult to say yes when someone offers as it is to go and ask, would you help me? Would you help me? And while solitude does have benefits in the healing process, that inner work time that we have, traveling the path with someone, a prayer partner, a practitioner, a friend, a counselor, a coach, can lend clarity, can give us a little different perspective, can provide another avenue or channel through which Spirit can speak to us. Because we sometimes get that hamster cage in our head going, and we just process the same thought over and over. Even though spirits may be giving us new thoughts, we're discounting those because they don't fit in the hamster wheel. But if someone else is speaking to us, sometimes they can share with us a perspective that allows us to have that aha moment, that transforming moment in our lives. Number 4, she says that we're wired for story. Now, we all know that stories can be empowering or debilitating, right? Our stories can lift us up or they can hold us down, depending on what it is. Either way, though, they help us to connect with each other. They help us to connect with each other. Anybody besides me ever been in a line somewhere and have the person around you begin to tell you their life story, right? It's like I sometimes think I have it tattooed across my forehead. Tell me your troubles. Tell me your story. I mean, sometimes it's things I'd really just rather not know. I don't need to know. But they do, because we're storytellers. All of us are. It's part of the human condition. Our ancestors sat around the fire and told stories, didn't they? And think about even with our technology today, the internet and so forth, what do we tune into? TED Talks, stories. YouTube, stories. Movies, stories. We're story people. We're all story people. So they help us to connect and empathize and give meaning to our life and share that with each other. We're going to talk a lot more about story next week. Number 5 on her list says we move what we are learning from our head to our hearts through our hands. Now, I've never heard it said quite that way, but I like that. We move what we're learning from our head to our hearts through our hands. And she's suggesting creativity. And it's very true. It's about the application, isn't it? It's about the application. And we know, even in spirituality, the principles of the science of mind. We can talk about them. They're very intellectual. They make a lot of sense. We can put the science on them. But until we embody that through application, it's not going to be transformative in our lives, is it? And that's really what she's talking about here as well. Ernest Holmes, the author of The Science of Mind, uses that beautiful word, embody. Embody, which means own it, become it. Embody the feelings, embody the teaching, embody the principles. And that's what she's suggesting here, is move it from just the heady learning to actually applying it with our hands to really get it in our hearts. In high school, I was a phys ed teacher aide. Anybody else do that? Yeah. And part of that process was learning to teach some of the different classes and things that we had. And one of those that I did was tennis. Now, tennis, I could read the rule book. I could tell you the rules. I could tell you about your swing and your stroke and violations and all that stuff. But I couldn't play worth a hoot. I could not play. I didn't have the application. I had the knowledge, but I didn't have the application, so I had no skills in that. Still don't really. I don't know, hand-to-eye coordination or something. I don't know what it was, but I just never embodied that piece of it. And I think this, again, happens in life and in the science of mind. We read, we study, we talk about it, but we haven't embodied it and practiced it to where it becomes part of our lives. But that's the spiritual journey, isn't it? Is continuing to practice and practice and practice until it does become a part of who we are and how we live our lives. Now, I like what Brene says about her work. She says it's not a quick fix situation, process. It might take 20 minutes. It might take 20 years. And in her book, she's got stories that show both. How it can be a shorter process when people can figure it out pretty quickly, but it may be deeper work that we have to do that takes a longer period of time to uncover and discover what it is. And in her book, she's got many examples that will show us that. Number 10, she says her research consistently revealed that rising strong is a spiritual process. It's not religious or requiring any particular theology, but that the critical component she discovered was of resiliency and overcoming struggle. Her definition of spirituality is recognizing and celebrating that we are all inextricably connected to one another by a power greater than all of us, and that our connection to that power and to one another is grounded in love and belonging. Practicing spirituality brings a sense of perspective, meaning, and purpose in our lives. Now, that's my favorite one, of course. I like that definition. I like that she's saying that spirituality is an important piece of this process, that it was consistently revealed in her research as part of her scientific studies. Spirituality, not necessarily any particular religion or faith tradition, but the idea of spirituality being connected to something greater than we are. Something greater than we are, and that we're all in it. And for me, this whole idea of the number 5 and 10, which 5 was the learning and then the spirituality, it translates into faith. For me, it translates into faith. Because the longer that I'm in this teaching, the more I recognize how important it is that I ground myself every day in my faith, in my understanding of spirit, that I live, move, and have my being in it, and it is in, through, and as me. That there is the oneness and the wholeness and the unity of all life, and that life is goodness, no matter the world of effects, but anchoring in that idea that life is goodness. Faith is how I can hang on in light of a mass shooting or global economic fears or other nonsensical things that we hear in the news every day that come at us. I cling to my faith in divine order when the stock market crashes, knowing God is my source. I believe that consciousness is the only way out, and it's the way in. And that the only way that I can affect that is from the inside out, by becoming that which I say I want to experience more of. That I no longer mentally kill off my enemies by my thinking. That I don't unreasonably blame and penalize others when they make a mistake through my words and actions. We sometimes think, I don't own a gun. How could I possibly be involved in any of that at all? I don't even own one. It's our thinking. Against ourselves, the violence that we think against ourselves and criticize ourselves and others. It's all consciousness, and we all live, move, and have our being in this consciousness. Our thoughts and actions towards ourselves. These activities outpicture in the world around us. It's very much like what Jesus said when he said, leave your offering there before the altar and go and reconcile with your brother, then come back. Then come back with your offering. And I think what he was talking about is this whole idea of we can't have peace on our planet until there's peace within. Peace within our immediate families, peace within our immediate community. Because it's all one mind, one consciousness. We're all in this together. Remember last week we talked about happiness and how it was a ripple effect. That there was 15% higher happiness in the people that we were with if we were happy. And that there was that ripple effect in that circle of connections. The same is true here, right? The same is true here. But what happens in that space of time when I leave the offering and I go to reconcile? What happens in that space? Well, Jesus didn't tell us that part, did he? He just said, go do it. He didn't give us the rest of the instructions. But Brene talks about the messy middle. And I would say that's the messy middle, because that's the cleanup work, isn't it? That's the messy middle. Now, she talks about the messy middle from a story about day 2. She's got a 3-day workshop that she does for people who want to learn to facilitate her work. And you have to go through 3 days to become a certified trainer or facilitator of Brene's work. And day one, everybody's arriving. It's exciting. They're getting the materials. They're getting connected. They're understanding what's happening. Day two is hard. Everybody says it's hard. And even the facilitators that learn it and go through it and say, oh, I'm going to do it different. I could do it better. It won't be so hard when I present it. Come back later and say, yeah, it's still hard. Because day two is the shame and worthiness work. Her whole 3 days is about learning and understanding the research back of what it is that she's teaching. Understanding the research, understanding the stories, understanding what shame and worthiness are really about. And the energy just goes down as people go in and do their work and find their own stories of shame and worthiness. Day two is hard. It's the messy middle. She calls it the point of no return because you've gone through day one. You know you've got day three ahead of you, but you're in day two. You got to go through it. It's like the aviation term that they use in the Air Force, the point of no return. You're past the midway. You don't have enough fuel to get back. You got to keep going. I don't think we necessarily had that in spirituality, but I also think we can't unlearn, can we? We can't unlearn. It's difficult to go back to believing in a Santa God in the sky when we learn that God is within us. It's hard to go back to that. In Brene's work, the messy middle is the place where we begin to think a different thought. Sound familiar? Yeah, we think a different thought. We take a different action, and we change and create a new story. Again, we're getting into some more of that next week. She tells a story in her book, lots of stories in her book, but she tells one about an interaction between she and her husband, Steve, at Lake Travis in Texas. Anybody been to Lake Travis in Texas? Yeah. And she's used this story a lot in her talk since then, and you may have heard it, and it's in your reading this week in your Sacred Circle in your book, so you'll get to read that. But what it did for me is reminded me of a story in my own life and some feelings that I had that honestly I hadn't thought of in years. So when I was in home building back in the mid-1990s, and I went to a networking event, and I ran into a woman that I knew socially outside through mutual friends that I also knew through business. And I noticed the whole time as we were chatting that she was looking over my head, looking around the room, not really present with me in the conversation, but looking around the room. And all of a sudden, mid-sentence, she says, "Bye, there's so-and-so," and walked away. I was like, what? What was that about? And I remember feeling dismissed, discounted, embarrassed, and then angry, right? Then angry. I felt like she was using me as a placeholder until something better came along. And what came along was one of the high-powered builders, national builders that was in town and came in the door, and she made a beeline for that business contact. So the messy middle is dealing with that emotional storm, isn't it? Now, those were painful feelings. And I didn't know at the time how to handle them, what was going on with them. So what did I do? I stepped into anger, I stepped into resentment, and I lived there about that particular relationship for many, many years. I wouldn't do business with her, etc. What's your go-to reaction when those little things happen to us? What's your go-to reaction? But I see now that dealing with that emotional storm would have been finding the courage to have a conversation about how I was feeling. Being vulnerable with her. Allowing myself to be vulnerable with her to express how I was really feeling. Can you imagine? Can you imagine a situation in your life? It would take courage to be vulnerable in a situation like that, wouldn't it? I didn't have it. I didn't know how to have a healthy dialogue about it without blaming her, shaming her, making her wrong. It's tough work, isn't it? Brene's not kidding when she's talking about the messy middle. It's sticky, icky, and messy in there to deal with those feelings and emotionals. And I didn't even know or realize until I started reading this material that I still might have some work around that to do. Now, I have run into her since, and we had a polite conversation. I don't resent her any longer or anything like that, but I still haven't gotten rid of all those emotions, have I? Still there. Very interesting discovery. Brene says the messy middle is where the magic happens. And the magic she's talking about, of course, is transformation, isn't it? It's doing that deeper work, transforming that emotional storm. And we deal with this stuff every single day of our lives, don't we? Some of them are really big, some of them are really old, and some of them are brand new. Someone may have said or done something this morning since you walked through that front door that you felt slighted, you felt disappointed, you felt, name the emotion. It could be something minute, but we have that all day, every day, because we're sensitive human beings in relationship with each other. And it's how we process that. Do we just discount it and let it go away, or do we dig into it and do the deeper work? Brene tells us that the goal of the process is to rise from our falls, overcome our mistakes, and face hurt in a way that brings more wisdom and wholeheartedness into our lives. And I think we can start small. Start small by being aware when something happens. And I've actually done this in business, where someone will say something, and I feel myself go off in a tangent with my own little story in my head about what it meant, and I will pause and come back and go, could we revisit that comment? I'm not sure what you meant by that. Could you help me understand? Could you say that a different way? Could you help me understand that in a different way? Because I'm making up a really, really different story. And they're usually delighted to explain rather than have that happen. And how many times do we have one of us angry about some made-up story about something that happened, and the other person either has a totally different story, different intent, or doesn't even remember the incident, right? Yeah. And that's what this work is about, is when we're triggered, when something happens, when something snaps us like a rubber band, is to pause and be aware, to ask the questions. So let's move into practicing the principles and see how we might rise strong from the ashes of our hurt, our disappointments, just like that mythical phoenix bird. We're just going to use her 3 steps, and the first one is reckoning. And that's walking into our story. And Brene says we do this by recognizing emotion and getting curious about our feelings and how they connect with the way we think and behave. Now, in my story, my feelings were used, dismissed, discounted, embarrassed, and angry. It's not easy to stand up here and say those words. What are your words? What's rolling through your head? Some story, some event that's happened. What were the feelings that occurred? Getting curious, we ask the questions. What do those feelings mean to me? When have I felt them before? When have I felt them since? How do I react to them? Why do I feel them? Connect the feelings to how I think and behave when I experience those emotions. Get curious. Get curious. Her second point is the rumble. The rumble. And that's owning our story. And she advises us to get honest about the stories we're making up about our struggle. Challenge these confabulations and assumptions to determine what's truth, what's self-protection, and what needs to change if we want to lead more wholehearted lives. Challenge our stories. I think this might be a good use of our self-talk. Anybody besides me have self-talk? Inner critic, right? We've got that going on. We might have a nice person in there too. I mean, we got a lot of, do you have voices in your head too? Okay. But there's a lot of voices in there advising us, right? And this might be a good use of that self-talk, asking ourselves these questions about our stories. The new ones about whatever happened this morning. The old ones that happened when we were 12 or 5 or 22, whatever that might be. Asking ourselves, again, in my example, what's really true about that story? What really happened that night? You just heard my side, my version, my made-up story about it. What really happened? Why would she do that? Was she planning it all day long? How can I hurt her? Right? Was it intentional? You know, you even ask those questions, you begin to go, well, that's just silly. Of course not. Am I just trying to protect myself, my ego, my sense of worth by making up this version of the story? Maybe. What really happened? Is her version different? Would she even recall the night? Probably not. Want to hear Brene's word, rumble? Anybody watch boxing? Let's get ready to rumble, right? And that's what I think of when I think of this, is we are rumbling with our stories. We're challenging them. We're giving them a left hook and an uppercut and a punch to the belly, right? We're dancing around them. We're challenging them to a duel, to the truth. We're rumbling with those stories, asking the questions, digging underneath them. Do they serve me? Do they not serve me? Is it even true anymore? Number 3 is the revolution. Brene says, write a new ending to our story based on the key learnings from our rumble, and use this new, braver story to change how we engage with the world and to ultimately transform the way we live, love, parent, and lead. So this is applicable across all areas of our lives, isn't it? A revolution means a turnaround and writing a new story. Particularly if it's an old story we've been carrying around for a long time. That can be revolutionary to our being, can it? It can be a turnaround of who we be. Anybody besides me know people whose story defines them? Something that may have happened to them when they were 16 years old that they still lead with that story in their lives at the age of 60? Yeah. Does it serve? Has it set the tone of their lives? My story happened in the mid-90s, mid to late 90s. This is 2019, folks. I didn't know I was carrying it. That's the beauty of the work. That's the subconscious layer that we don't know is there sometimes. So my challenge to us this week, read the book. Join us in a sacred circle. Let's dig in and dive into this. Let's have some fun with this exploration and conversation and learn how to have a dialogue. The safety of spiritual community is a beautiful place to do this and to practice this. And then we can take it out into the world. Take it out into our communities, into our jobs. And that ripple effect will begin to happen. So I want to close today with a quote from Mark Twain that seems appropriate to our conversation. And he says, it is curious that the physical courage should be so common in the world and moral courage so rare. And doing this work takes courage. It takes courage to look within and explore our old stories, to do the work. It takes courage to have the conversations. It takes courage to heal. So let's go out and have a courageous week this week. Would you join me in prayer as we anchor this morning? How good it is that we come together in community today as we recognize that we are in the unified wholeness of the one. That there is only one power, presence, unity, life. And that life is God. It is the infinite intelligence, divine order, peace, wholeness, harmony. It is infinite wisdom and intelligence. It is clarity. And all of that is here now, present in, through, and as me, as an expression of it. For I know that I am in, through, and as the one, as it is in, through, and as me. We are united in wholeness and harmony, oneness, peace, love. And as I know this for me, I know that this for each and every one of us here today. For we are each manifestations of the one power, the one presence, the one life, the one unity that is all. And so knowing this, I speak my word for and about each of us today, knowing, claiming, and accepting the resurrection of each of us. As we open to new ideas and new stories and rising strong from whatever mistakes and foibles and failures that we may be dealing with, whatever past experiences, we just allow this beautiful work to be revealed through us and as us and transform our lives. And I know that for anyone that has anything on their heart today, be it a story, be it a feeling, be it an emotional storm of their very own, that as they bring that into the awareness of this high consciousness in this prayer, that whatever needs to be calmed in that storm, whatever needs to be clarified, revealed, healed, prospered, whatever it might be, I know that as they bring it forward in their consciousness, that the universe already knows the solution, the healing, the revelation. And for this, I'm grateful. I'm so grateful for the manifestation of this prayer, for the wholeness that we are, as I release this into the activity of mind, knowing that it is done. It is so. And we affirm together by saying, and so it is.